Bills with off-season needs, addressing it through the NFL draft this past weekend. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, everybody. I'm back, Andy, after missing time with an inner ear infection that's still bothering me.
What a week to be out. The NFL draft.
22 years, Andy. I had never missed the NFL draft. This year, I got to experience it
like a fan
would,
right.
Sitting at home on my couch, although I couldn't really hear too well with the inner ear infection I have and stuff. But it was an interesting take from not working it. I know with what the Bills did trading out of the first round, Kevin Carroll would have been going crazy.
You're like one of those old print writers. Deadline, come on.
Right. We got to get things done by a certain time.
Right.
But that's just not the case anymore. It's not the world we're in right now, Andy. So NFL fan Kevin sitting at home just as annoyed that the Bills kept trading back that pick and eventually didn't have a pick because I kept telling my wife, oh, just stay up a little bit longer. They're about to pick. She had to work the next day. I was out sick. And then eventually they didn't pick, and she blamed me. It became my fault that the Bills didn't pick, and I was lying to her all night.
Well, that's par for the course, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you get blamed for – I have big shoulders, Andy. I can take it. I used to work with John Scott. He blamed me for everything that went wrong.
He wasn't always wrong.
But yeah,
just the way he said it.
True. But you and I haven't really had a chance to talk what the Bills did with trading that pick to Kansas City, and what I'm hearing over the weekend and from when I first stepped foot into the newsroom this week was that the optics of it is just bad, that your partner was the Kansas City Chiefs, and eventually a lot of averages say this guy Worthy will burn the Bills on a play and everyone's going to get ticked off at some point in the near future.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought exercise because if they had traded with some other team, would people probably be upset? No.
Right.
I don't think so. Or if the Chiefs traded up and drafted an edge rusher or a linebacker, would they be upset? No. It's because you traded with your arch rival who you can't get over the hump against in the postseason. Beating them plenty of times in the regular season. That seems to be almost customary now.
Right.
Usually good games. And you also needed a wide receiver. And then the Chiefs also needed a wide receiver. And people have nightmares of Tyreek Hill. And I think they see a little bit of that in Xavier Worthy, who ran the fastest 40-yard dash time in the history of the NFL Combine. Smaller guy, 5'8", 5'9", 165 pounds, whatever he is, but an absolute burner. And you allow the Chiefs to go get that guy. The counter to that argument is this, and Brandon Beane brought this up multiple times when asked about it after the draft each night. Just by the Bills sending that pick to the Chiefs did not prevent the Chiefs from getting Xavier Worthy. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
I kind of phrased that wrong. So the only real way for the Bills to block the Chiefs from getting Worthy, the guy they coveted apparently, was to take him themselves. If they weren't going to take him themselves, it kind of evens out in the wash because Kansas City could have traded up right after Buffalo's pick to get him, or they could have stood at 32 and maybe he falls there. But it is the optics of it, right?
And that's where I've been sitting on this since Thursday night and through the weekend was Worthy wasn't going to be a Buffalo Bill. I don't think he was.
Right.
I don't think it's what they were targeting. I think ultimately with Keon Coleman, we'll get to in a bit, that maybe that was actually the guy that they were targeting and realized that they could keep moving back and still get the guy that they wanted. Now, like I said, when Worthy burns the Bills, and it'll come, for sure it's going to happen, to kind of separate yourself from we handed the Chiefs this game by giving them this pick, because I agree with what you said. They were going to get him eventually. The Bills just traded back. It just, the visual of it is just going to gnaw at people. Oh, even if they're not head to head. If Worthy rips off a 2-touchdown game
week 1
where he's flying down the field,
right.
It's, oh my God.
Well, that's what this is ultimately going to boil down to, because whether the pick was made by trading or not, this draft will be judged by Worthy versus Keon Coleman, who the Bills ended up selecting at the top of the second round. Because whether they traded or not really won't make a difference at that point, because the Bills still had a chance to draft Worthy. And if it turns out, my goodness, Worthy's great, and Keon Coleman struggles or is middle of the road, that's where it'll be even worse.
Yeah.
And Bills fans will never let anybody forget it.
And I think looking at Keon Coleman, Andy, the Bills' first overall pick, coming on day 2 at the start of the second round, when you hear that, he's not a burner, he's a bigger guy, he can't separate once he catches the ball, but just the frame and the look of him, and when you start going through the Florida State highlights on what he was able to put down on tape, heck, man, you even have him pulling a Josh Allen, leapfrogging over a defender at one point. It'll play out how it plays out, but right now as we sit here today, I think that what they did in the first round, trading back out of it and getting this guy Coleman, I think he's the fit for what they're trying to do with the other weapons that they have in place already in that wide receiver room. And oh, by the way, Dalton Kincaid. So now you have a bigger bodied wide receiver almost looking like Gabe Davis XL, like a improved version of Gabe Davis. And I loved Gabe Davis when he was here. Nothing but high things for him. But this just seems like Gabe Davis to the next level.
So if he's Gabe Davis, do they still need a number 1 receiver?
No, because they're at a different point with this offense right now, and where Josh Allen is that a dedicated number 1 wide receiver, I don't think is necessary. I think maybe that even affected Josh Allen in a negative way with Stephon Diggs here towards the end of last year, and in the middle where they were still forcing Diggs the ball sometime, that now you have Josh Allen as the ultimate decision maker, and no one out there should be chirping in his ear that they need to get the ball more than anyone else. I think this sets up nice with what they have as far as weapons on offense go.
Yeah, I'm going to wait to pass judgment exactly, and we're in a world of hot takes, right?
Oh, yeah.
And draft grades. I don't know how good Keon Coleman is going to be. There's some great things that you see on film, and there's some not so great things. Obviously, he's not the fastest guy in the world. Ran a 4.6 140 at the combine. That was one of the slower wide receiver times. And it doesn't necessarily fit what Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have been talking about adding more explosive players. However, Brandon Beane said that they get the GPS numbers from practice and games and things like that from the colleges. He actually was more like a 4.5 guy, which is closer to where you want it to be. He said if he was in the 4.4s, he would have been in the top 10.
Mm-hmm.
And that he plays, his game speed is faster than his 40 time. So he plays faster. Whether that's true or not, whether that translates to the NFL or not, we'll see. Beane says that he's shifty because he's a former college basketball player. He actually played college basketball and football at Michigan State before he ended up transferring to Florida State for last season. He said he's got some shiftiness to him, the ability to box out and go get the football, to high point the football. You see that a lot in the highlights. He makes some spectacular catches. I've seen some pushback that the highlights don't tell the whole story, and that folks that watched him day in and day out maybe saw him not get all those balls, but he did make some spectacular catches, but more often than not didn't. But Brandon Beane said, look, this kid's a dog. He can go out there and play. They're going to rely on him early as their X receiver. I mean, I expect him to go in and be their starting X receiver in that Gabe Davis position right away. What that means for the Z on the other side where Diggs was, probably Shakir or Samuel, I would guess, at this point, unless they make another move. We'll probably get to that, but there could be another move coming down the line here.
We'll just get into it. Do you see another move coming at wide receiver? Because I look at it, and I look at the group of receivers they have there right now, and I have my starters out there: Shakir, Samuel, Coleman, with Dalton Kincaid.
You're good with that.
There. And right now, with Josh Allen making the decisions, pulling the trigger, I'm 100% fine with that. I don't see any need to bring anyone else in at any point in this stage, barring injuries and crap like that. But I'm satisfied with what they have right now.
I don't see them making any sort of like a big trade. Brandon Beane kind of poo-pooed, poured some water on the idea of trading for like a Deebo Samuel type. They just don't really have the cap space. He said don't expect any kind of big trade. They will open up some cap space post June 1st for the Trey White release. They've only got about less than $3 million in cap space right now. That $10 million, though, a lot of that's going to have to go to signing the draft class.
Mm-hmm.
So that still leaves them a little wiggle room to bring in some guys. And there's some names still out there on the free agent list that they could go after. They'd probably have to make some roster moves again if they wanted to go somewhere big like OBJ or something like that.
Right.
I think they're probably going to roll with what they have here.
I think so. And you touched on this earlier. Coleman, as far as what I've been asked over the weekend was, when do you think Coleman will be a regular in the starting lineup? Like you said,
Day
away.
one.
Right away. He's your de facto first-round pick. Yeah, it was at the top of the second round. But he's your guy that you went out and got to come in. And as you said, Brandon Beane even said, I've already told him we're going to count on him early.
Right.
I know he at least has texted back and forth with Josh Allen that they both love each other, and
Josh loves everybody.
They're new best friends, right, Andy?
Yeah,
They'll be playing Call of Duty together before you know it.
Right, and then in 4 years we'll be going,
right.
What happened between Keon Coleman and Josh Allen? No, I mean, Coleman is a big personality. I don't know if you watched his press conference when he came in. The first thing he does is he gets into it with one of our colleagues, Mookie Hawkins from 1080 WUFO, about the jacket he was wearing. He had on this bright yellow winter coat. Mookie asked him where he got it, and it was this whole interaction about him getting it at Macy's and buying clothes on sale or off season to get them cheaper.
Right.
It was hilarious. Then after the press conference, he eats a cookie with Heather Prusak from Channel 4.
I saw that it was almost like he was eyeballing those cookies the entire press conference.
Well, the first thing he said when he walked in is he's walking up on the stage was, "Oh, y'all got snacks here, right? Where'd you get all those snacks?" Funny guy, and Brandon Beane said he's a big personality. He also said that he told Coleman that if you apply yourself and you put in the work and use the resources we have in terms of getting a little more explosive, getting stronger, all of those things, we see the sky is the limit for you. Not just learning your playbook and going to practice and doing the things you have to do, but taking those extra steps. He's only 20 years old. He's going to turn 21 soon, but right now he's only 20 years old. He could still be growing into his body, right? And Brandon Beane seemed to think that he could add some explosiveness still that maybe will help that speed and separation and those sorts of things. Josh Allen hasn't really had a receiver like him since the Kelvin Benjamin days. Kelvin Benjamin, we all know how that turned out.
Right.
But Josh has thrived more on separators, smaller separators. He's not a great separator. I think he's got enough. We'll see how it turns out in the NFL. But he's a guy who's going to use his body to box out those sorts of things. He's going to be a red zone threat.
Contested catches, it seems like that would be his forte.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, that he's made some great, unbelievable catches where he can stretch backwards and grab the ball, go up high and get it, kind of shift his body. And Brandon Beane said that his basketball skills, I think, translate well to helping him be able to do that for a bigger receiver, because often those guys are a little stiffer, less flexible, able to make those kind of acrobatic catches. Can he do it consistently? Can he win on the outside enough to be able to be open enough in the NFL where that margin is so much smaller? And those guys are long-armed, athletic. Now, he did it in the ACC and he did it in the Big Ten, probably two of the three best conferences in college football. Didn't do it in the SEC. We know how that works.
Mm-hmm.
But he had 3 touchdowns in his debut against LSU last season. That's SEC competition.
Absolutely.
And did really well there. I think that's the highlights that a lot of people have seen is against LSU.
That's the thing with the rules in college and the transfer portal and stuff. Like, you're watching video of some of these guys during the draft that they're like, oh, out of blah, blah, blah school. And yet they're wearing a different uniform, because a lot of these guys now, it's like, get used to it. A lot of these guys aren't at one program for their entire college career. So it makes it really interesting when you start going through players' backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, too, to see how that ability translates to the NFL in terms of he's learned a couple of different offenses in a couple of different years. That might actually help him in his process because he's used to new offenses and things like that, which kind of dovetails into something I wanted to bring up briefly. We might be seeing a different Bills approach. They have a different offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Brady, he finished out the season for Ken Dorsey using basically Dorsey's offense, but he could change things completely this season if he wanted to, and maybe it's a different approach to the type of player and the type of offense they want to run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always been a fan of modeling your offense to the talent that you have on your roster, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we could be looking at that. Overall, Andy, I mean, I know we're not guys who give out draft grades or anything, but as far as their first pick in the draft, at least on paper right now, as we look at this, I think that they hit on, at least right now, what they were looking for as far as wide receiver off the top.
Yeah, we all knew that was number one. They needed a wide receiver, and Brandon Beane said they wanted to make that pick at 33 because that's where the board kind of started to drift off. They had some opportunities to maybe trade back again. There were a couple guys left, but that pack of guys, second to third tier guys, was going to start to thin out. I think they addressed a whole lot of needs throughout this draft. You look at their first 3 picks: wide receiver,
right,
safety in the second round with Cole Bishop. Third round, they go with a defensive tackle, Dwayne Carter out of Duke. And then they kind of get into some different positions. They pick up a center along the way. They pick up
that was
a running back. So they kind of hit on needs throughout this.
A lot of what we had talked about at the start of the offseason, you have your obvious positions of need. But I said basically every pre-draft thing we did that at some point they should go out and get a center to start working with and developing into their center of the future. We know that things are set right now with the Bills at center for this year.
Are they?
Well, that brings up the question. Mm-hmm. I just felt, even on top of that, safety, defensive tackle, running back, center to me was something I was keeping an eye on.
I thought they could take a center in the first or second round, honestly, if the board fell right and they had those guys graded at those positions. They bring in Cedric Van Pran Granger out of Georgia, who obviously comes from maybe the best program in college football currently and started for a long time for that team and is a sneaky pick to maybe come in, and maybe he starts right away. I don't think they're going to push that. I think the idea right away will be to go with their initial plan of Connor McGovern sliding over from guard to center in the wake of Mitch Morse's departure. But maybe this guy outplays him. Maybe they feel like he's so good, we're going to kick McGovern back over to guard and keep strength on strength. Bean also said they do have some thought that their scouts think he could also play guard too. So
well, that's what I was wondering, if he'd be worked out more at guard once practices
I think
start
we'll
up.
see in a few weeks once OTAs really get going here on the field. But yeah, you're right. Maybe he can outdo David Edwards for that left guard spot. We'll find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer no longer in the Bills' defensive backfield, safety was something that I had brought up. Day 2 pick, go out there and get a safety, maybe even over the weekend. But ultimately, the Bills' second round pick, the Bills go out and get a safety who possibly could also earn the right to be a starter right off the bat as well. He has that background, and we're talking about Cole Bishop.
Yeah, and this is a guy who had kind of risen up draft boards, ran a pretty good 40 time, 4.45, and versatile player. He's a guy who prides himself on being able to cover tight ends, which we know is important. He prides himself on being able to play both free safety and box safety. Has played a little bit of nickel in the overhang packages too. So I think this is a guy that represents exactly what Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer did, who, yeah, towards the end, Poyer was more of the box guy and Micah was the deep guy, but they both were pretty interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that works out pretty well. And the fun part about this guy is he used to cover Dalton Kincaid in practice.
That, to me, is a nice little link, a nice little cherry on top to this, was that he had been going up against Dalton Kincaid during practice his entire college career at Utah.
Yeah, and it's one of those iron sharpen iron kind of things in that he said that going up against Kincaid in practice every day for 2 years really brought out the best in him and made him a better coverage safety. And then Brandon Beane asked him who got the better of it, and Bishop said, I got the better of Kincaid. And Brandon actually went back and talked to Dalton Kincaid about it and said, yeah, you know what, you're right. Bishop did get the better of me most days. So that's if he can guard Kincaid, who we all expect is an ascending player in the NFL, that's a good thing for the Bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Meanwhile, defensive tackle was an area that we all knew from even watching last season. If your starters aren't out there, the defensive tackle position was a problem for the Bills, especially as the season wore on. That, I mean, heck, even in the Chiefs game, I mean, that whole D-line was like they weren't even there. But so they do that. Dwayne Carter, defensive tackle out of Duke, they go with in the third round.
And this is a guy who has football in his blood. Father played at Ohio State. He's got uncles. He's got all these people in his life that played college football. And he is a leader. He's a man. He came out, and I thought he looked and sounded like a preacher who was in his 30s or 40s.
Gotcha.
He's like 23 years old. 3-year captain at Duke. We know he's intelligent because he went to Duke. He is a guy who can play the 3 technique mostly, I would think, but also can kick inside. So he's a player that they're going to plug and play, as Brandon Beane said. He's a guy who can come in right away and be in that defensive line rotation. And they don't have to count on him to play 70% of the snaps because we know that the Bills like to rotate. And they needed to get younger. They needed to get a little better at that position, especially, as you said, behind the starters. Daquan Jones was having an all-pro caliber year last season before he got hurt, but he's a little older, re-signed with the team. And Oliver had a great year as well, had his best year of his career. Now that you bring in some younger guys in Carter to help out there.
Do you see Carter off the jump here, like we've talked about other players who could start or not start, but be in the rotation right off the bat,
yes.
week one?
Brandon Beane
he's
said
in the rotation.
Brandon Beane said he's plug and play. He's going to be in. So I take that as he's probably Ed Oliver's backup right off the jump.
I mean, it really seems like, off the start here, the Bills are hitting on guys who can really make an impact right away, they feel.
And they need that because of all the leadership and the veteran players they jettisoned. If you're going to go younger, because you have to for cap reasons, for philosophy reasons, for getting more speed and explosiveness, those guys have to play.
Right.
So you don't have the luxury of just saying Keon Coleman's going to sit for 2 years because we have Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis.
Right.
You got to throw the ball somewhere, right?
Yep.
Dwayne Carter's got to go in somewhere, right? They'll ease him in, and they've done that in the past. But I think more so than ever, these young guys are going to play a big role.
Now, what about this? The team has been searching for a backup to James Cook. Last year, rotated some veteran guys in there. But now in the draft, they do go out and get a running back that's a different build than James Cook. Ray Davis, running back out of Kentucky, who can give them maybe that 1-2 punch that they hope for. But again, Andy, now we're getting to the part of the draft where is he someone who maybe is even fighting for a position, let alone to be James' backup officially?
I would think that he is kind of their complementary power back, a different type of back than Cook, and also Ty Johnson, who I think we saw people kind of liked him.
Like Ty Johnson.
At the end of last season. Davis is a little bit more powerful of a guy, runner between the tackles. Also has some juice in the passing game, too. Rushed for 1,000 yards career at each of 3 different schools, which is kind of cool. There's your NIL transfer, that sort of thing. So I think he's a complimentary back, and people kind of laughed at me. I projected them to take a running back in this area. Oh, another running back. I'm like, well, you need something else. You lost Latavius Murray. You didn't bring him back. You need a bigger, powerful back. He's not huge, 5'8", 211, but I think he's just kind of a different style than Cook and Ty Johnson. And he's got a pretty wild backstory. He's been through it in his life. Grew up in foster care in California, spent 8 years in foster care, was homeless at some points. He kind of said, I at 12 years old, I knew I needed to be a man and raise myself. And here he is in the NFL a few years later. So he's got some grit and some toughness behind him because of his life experiences.
Seems like a lot of these players coming in on the Bills are wise beyond their years almost. Life experience.
Yes.
You're still young, but while the team's getting younger, you're bringing in players that have the character and the background where, yeah, you're young, but you've lived life a lot already.
Yeah, Bean was kind of asked about that, and because they've lost so much leadership, they need guys who can kind of lead themselves in a way, right? Also, he said we don't want all choir boys. We still need guys that can play with an edge, that are nasty, so to speak, that are fiery. So he said it's a good blend, this class is, of those types of characters.
And we can go through the rest of the class. I mean, they grabbed a linebacker, an edge rusher for depth there, offensive tackle, a cornerback, Andy, Daquan Hardy out of Penn State late in the draft.
Really fast guy.
As well, that, I'm, from what I've looked at, possibly depth at cornerback and a returner.
Yeah, and so they've got a spot in the return game that's open now because of departures in the offseason. So to look at this guy who could be a nickel-type corner, I think he projects more as a slot corner, so maybe he becomes a backup to Taron Johnson, but also provides some juice in the return game. Did pretty well with that at Penn State, so that's a double dip there. And with the new kickoff rules,
well, that's what I was thinking. The new kickoff rules, the return guy is maybe becoming important.
Right, you need a kick returner and you need a punt returner, so he maybe has a role there.
The one guy the Bills drafted that my phone actually blew up of people asking me what it's about, is Travis Clayton
Yeah.
out of England through the international pathway, I think it's called.
Yeah.
International player, has a background in rugby, I believe in maybe soccer.
Rugby, soccer. He's done all kinds of sports.
Fast dude for a big dude, too.
6'7", 309 or 307 pounds, ran under a 4.8 40.
It's crazy, man.
So,
But again, you have the background of soccer and rugby. You would expect
right.
even a big dude to get his wheels on.
So it's interesting, this International Pathways program. You can draft these guys, or you can sign them as a free agent, like they did with Christian Wade. You remember the running back a few years ago?
Of course.
That everybody kind of had their thing about. He was one of those
Scored a touchdown in preseason and
Right.
was going to be the next
training
Walter
camp
Payton.
love affair kind of
Yeah.
thing. But the Bills said, we don't think he's going to last. So there was some interest in this guy.
Yeah.
He's a project, certainly. He's raw. I think they do get a roster exemption on the practice squad for him. So they get an extra practice squad spot if they want to keep him there. Just a project, kind of a guy that they can see if he can turn into it and he can pick up the game of football. He's got the quicks. He knows how to run and tackle. It's just, he hasn't really played football. Apparently he got into the Pathways program like 5 years ago in 2019.
Okay.
Just now got the call.
Would seem to me, big guy, fast, O-line, a lot easier to pick up. And again, I don't want to offend any offensive linemen, but a lot easier to pick up than someone who's never played football like Christian Wade. You put him in at running back, and you're trying to tell him how to read defenses and holes and whatnot and this and that. I'm sure they didn't get too in-depth with Christian Wade on what he was actually doing out there. But it seems like you got the recipe here for a project.
Yeah,
Could
why
end
not?
up
Take
helping you
a
out.
flyer. If he works out, great. If not,
Yeah.
no harm, no foul.
Undrafted free agents, Andy. We see all the rumors going on over the weekend. The Bills, as of this time when we record, have not sent out the official list
Right.
of who is actually on the roster.
We may not get that
It's just rumors.
until closer to rookie minicamp, too.
Man, I always thought it came out the Monday after the draft.
Sometimes I don't know. Maybe it does.
Yeah.
I can't
So
remember.
is that next then? Rookie minicamp's going to be coming up around the corner.
Yeah, it's basically in a couple of weeks from when we're recording this. So not this week, but the tail end of next week.
Overall, what do you give the Bills? I give the Bills a thumbs up on this draft. I think they
Yeah, I'd say it's
hit and attacked everything they needed to. Whether it will be a home run or not remains to be seen, but at least where we stand right now in the spring, it looks like a solid draft for the Bills this year.
B+, A- to me. Good, not great. I don't think they still got – well, it'll depend on Coleman. If Coleman's great, obviously that elevates it. If he's average, then it's just an average draft.
Can you think of another draft for the Bills recently where after all was said and done, you were like, all right, I like what they did. I went through different years. I couldn't come up with one.
You didn't like what they've done most years?
I'm saying like 100%.
Okay.
Like nailed it. Like I look at this and I'm like, okay, there were needs. They filled those needs. I can't remember a draft where after, other than like, I mean, even drafting Dalton Kincaid last year left a lot of people like.
Well, they got Kincaid, and then in the third round they went back to another linebacker with Dorian Williams, which they had done the year before in the third round with
Right.
Terrell Bernard. So there have been some head scratchers. The one thing I think the Bills are kind of getting a little criticism for, they didn't go double dip on wide receiver.
Yes.
They didn't take one in the second and then another in the fourth or fifth. I can see it, why people would say that, because they have the spots to fill.
All right, Andy. While I was at home, sitting on my couch, all medicated up to get rid of this infection inside my face, noticed a decent crowd in Detroit
Set the record.
for the draft. You've been there. You've covered drafts. You've been on location. But to me, I'm sitting there watching it, and I'm like, I could not, as a fan, take a day and just go sit there and watch people call off names.
Yeah,
It amazes me that the amount of fans that get all dolled up and go, and if it were in Buffalo, would people want to go and put all their bills? I'm sure they would draw huge numbers if it were in Buffalo.
They would. I have been to several of these drafts since they started going on location. The first one I covered was Radio City Music Hall, and then they started going to Chicago, Philadelphia, Nashville, Dallas, and kind of opening it up and making them these big festivals. And I would go if I were a fan, but only if it was like at a destination city.
I got you.
So if it was somewhere warm where you could make a vacation out of it.
L.A., Miami.
Right, Vegas, whatever. Or if it's like in a really – Nashville was awesome.
Yeah.
Like Nashville was such a cool experience when they shut down Broadway and you got all the bars and then the street is just packed from the Predators Arena at one end a mile down the road to where they had the draft set up along the river there in Nashville. That was really cool. Dallas was cool. I don't know if I personally would want to stand in Detroit or Buffalo,
Right.
no offense, in the end of April in the possible rain and 40-degree weather and just stand there for 3 hours watching the draft.
Yeah.
That's not me, but that's no offense to anyone who would want to do that because I think a big part about the NFL and a big part about Bills Mafia is that congregation, that togetherness, that experience of like we're doing something that's cool. And 275,000 people or whatever it was lined the streets of downtown Detroit at a fake stage. It wasn't even like in a historic site or anything. Like the one that was in Philadelphia was like on the steps of the library where Rocky ran up the steps.
Yes.
Right? That was cool. So not for me personally, but I can see why people would want to do it.
Yeah, I get it. I'm with you. I don't think even if it was here right in our backyard, I probably wouldn't go to it unless, work called for it or otherwise. All right, we'll continue with the 3 and out, Andy. NBA versus NHL playoffs. What you got? I mean, I'm all NHL. I've been watching all the different playoff matches. I couldn't even tell you what's going on in the NCAA postseason.
NCAA?
NBA.
You're out of touch.
That's how bad it That's where my basketball ends, the NCAA tournament.
See, I'm the opposite. I've really lost touch with hockey lately.
Yeah?
I'll watch the Stanley Cup final. If a game happens to be on and I'm flipping through the channels, I'll watch that. Honestly, I haven't watched as much NBA as I used to either, but I've watched far more NBA and far more on top of what's going on in the NBA than the NHL. Like I roughly know, like I know the Rangers swept the Caps, but beyond that, I have no idea what's going on in the NHL right now. And that part of that has to do with the Sabres,
right?
Incessantly not being good. Because when the Sabres are good, we're all paying attention to the matchups and playoff seedings and who they might face in the next round. It's been 13 years.
Right.
I've worked here 13 years. I've never covered a Sabres playoff run.
Well, I guess we found the guilty party here, right?
It's me.
Superstitious sports fans. Andy, what you watching as we wrap this up other than sports stuff? I tried to get into that 3-body problem show that you were talking about. Apparently, I fell asleep with it on, and it didn't end where I thought it ended.
It just played 6 episodes for you.
So it all played out.
Right.
So now I'm back. I'm at the spot with that show. I tried to get into, you know what the Mandela effect is?
Yeah.
So I tried to get into some conspiracy stuff on YouTube on some of that stuff. Man, you could just watch some of that stuff for hours about things that you thought you remembered properly.
My favorite one of that, the Mandela effect, is Michael Jackson's Smooth Criminal. Have you seen that one?
No.
You've been struck by a smooth criminal.
Yeah.
You remember that line as being that, right?
Correct.
It doesn't exist. It just says hit by twice.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
But everyone remembers Struck By.
Yeah.
You've been hit by, you've been struck by.
A smooth criminal. Boom,
Right.
boom. Yeah.
Right. So apparently, I looked into this. I went down this rabbit hole once. There were a couple of different versions of the song recorded, one for like music videos and things that you find on YouTube, and it says hit by.
Yeah.
But there was a version at one point in the 80s that says you've been hit by, you've been struck by. That's why everyone remembers that, but you can't find it anywhere.
See, because that was, and it was a different song. It wasn't that song, but when it comes to music, there were releases that were put out on the radio that had the lyrics in it that you remember from hearing it on the radio, but if you go play the song on the album, it's different.
Yes, that's exactly what happened here, I believe.
So, Berenstain Bear, there was a movie on Tubi about it that I tried to watch, which just became so stupid, I had to shut off. But I don't know why. I got all into it while I was dealing with this sinus infection.
You and Claire watch some weird stuff.
Oh, you don't even know that happened.
I don't want to know.
There's some stuff I'm not even going to say on here.
All right, keep it to yourself.
So that's going to do it. Andy and I will be back as we inch closer to rookie mini camps coming up around the corner. Any other big Bills news that breaks throughout the week, we'll be right back there. But as always, for Andy Young, I'm Kevin Carroll. Thanks for joining us, everyone.